Thank you very much, Catherine, and also for that introduction. Welcome everyone once again. Without wasting time, which we haven't got much of, I will go straight into introducing the candidates for this hustings, and then we'll go straight into the questions then. So today in this event with us, we've got Jane Hutt, who is the Labour Senedd candidate for Vale of Glamorgan. We've also got Elin Walker Jones, who's the Plaid Cymru Senedd candidate for Clwyd West and North Wales regional list. We've also got Rees, the Conservative Party Senedd candidate for Cynon Vale, and also Oliver Townsend, who is the Liberal Democrats Senedd candidate for Islwyn. And finally, but not the least, we've got Helen Westhead, who is the Green Party Senedd candidate for South Wales Central Regional List. So big welcome to all our candidates today, and thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today. In the first segment, we will take questions from all our partner organizations, so one question from each partner organization. And then in the second segment, we will take questions from the chat box and also questions that have already been emailed ahead of the event today. And I will go round the candidates in no particular order and asking them to respond in 1 minute to the question. So the first question is coming from our partner organisation, Disability Wales. And here's the question. Given that disabled people represent 68% of COVID-related deaths, and Disability Wales research found that 76% of disabled people have no faith that their rights will improve in the next 5 years, what will your party do to earn and keep the trust of disabled people? And I would like to ask Helen to please take that question first.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a really good question. The impacts of COVID on disabled people has been shocking. I was involved in shielding phone calls, speaking to a lot of people directly. And actually, I think that based on those conversations and the Green Party's UBI, Universal Basic Income, will really help. Obviously, there's a lot more we can do in terms of accessibility, and that's set out in our manifesto in transport and housing. But Universal Basic Income will tackle the poverty issues that some disabled people have faced during COVID, alongside the challenges that they experience in their lived-in experience as well.
Oliver?
Sorry, yes, coming off mute. Yeah, I think the trust is an absolutely key issue. You know, we've seen throughout COVID that not only have disabled people been more impacted through loss of life due to COVID than any other group, we also know that we've had a shift back from the social model of disability due to sometimes understandable, but I think completely wrong, decisions by government to try and talk about people in specific groups. And that's allowed the sort of crawl back of the medical model. So in order to win people's trust, we need to make sure, firstly, that disabled people are represented in politics. That's one of the reasons I'm standing, but also one of the reasons why the Welsh Liberal Democrats support a proportional voting system, which means that we don't any longer have the existence of safe seats, which makes it harder and harder for disabled people to campaign, because a lot of it is built on how much you can deliver and how much you can knock on doors. That's one tiny example. There's a lot more, very similar to some of the things Helen said, and I'd love to talk about more of that today.
Mia?
Sorry, the mute button disappeared for a second there. Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think it's really important we recognise that this is not new. As with so many inequalities, the inequalities faced by those people who are disabled have been magnified during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, before the pandemic, on average, disabled people earn 15% less than others. And I think that, that just highlights, just in an employment sphere, how there is an inequality, and you've got to look at the rights around that. In the Welsh Conservatives, we would focus on 3 key areas, which would be housing, education and employment, and making sure that rights in those particular areas were focused on. So we would simplify and streamline the housing adaptation system, making it much more flexible, quick and easier to work with. We would increase funding in education, and we would also do better promotion of the Access to Work scheme, which actually has one of the lowest rates of access for employers in Wales, just really break down those employment barriers that many disabled people face, and many employers who misunderstand what it means in order to, what we need to provide if you're going to recruit somebody who is disabled, and the support that is already out there, so it doesn't have any financial impact, which is a terrible misconception that unfortunately too many employers still have. Thank you, Patience.
And Elin?
Yeah, diolch am y cwestiwn. Thank you for the question. Excellent. I work as a psychologist with children with disabilities and their family by trade, and I saw for myself the dreadful effect that lockdown and the COVID had on my families and the families that I work with in terms of not being able to access support. Everything shut down. It was awful, and I can't stress enough how we must rise out of this. So many of the I could go on for a long time, so I'll try and be brief. One of the things that Plaid Cymru wants to do is to create a seamless health and social care service, so that social care is treated in the same way as health. So it would be free at the point of access to everyone, whatever their needs. And of course, that doesn't just include people who are elderly, it also includes disabled people. People with all sorts of different needs. But of course, there's been opportunities as well from COVID. One of the things that the disabled community have been talking about for a long time is flexible working, and lockdown has shown that we can do it. It's a matter of political will. A friend of mine wrote in the press recently, she's got, oh, does that mean I need to stop? Oh, sorry. Please, let's talk again about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elin. And Jane?
Thank you very much, Patience. Well, of course, I acknowledge the terrible tragedy, the disproportionate impact on disabled people of COVID-19 when I made my statement in December on the International Day on the Rights of Disabled People. And again, in that statement, again, recommitted the Welsh Government to take forward the social model of disability. The first thing we need to do is implement the report that we commissioned through the Disability Equality Forum, which I've been supporting and chairing, to ensure that we deliver all the recommendations of Professor Debbie Foster's report, which of course many of you are aware of. We commissioned to look at the impact of COVID-19 on disabled people. The First Minister agreed at the end of the Senedd session to set up a steering group, a working group, to ensure that that is implemented. And secondly, just to say that we've also in our manifesto committed to incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People into Welsh law. And of course, we have appointed those disabled people employment champions already, and committed nearly 40 million to employment support by those most negatively impacted by COVID.
Thank you very much. If you're just joining us, this is the Equalities Hustings with our political candidates. And today with us, we've got Jane Hutt from the Labour Party, Elin Walker Jones from Plaid Cymru, Rees from the Conservative Party, Oliver Townsend from the Liberal Democrat, and Helen Westhead from the Green Party. And thank you very much to the candidates for joining us. So straight away, I'm going to go into the second question, which is from Race Council Cymru, another collaborating partner for this event. And the question is, in light of the disproportionate effects of the pandemic on ethnic minority people, the increased campaigns for racial diversity, and the Race Equality Action Plan for Wales, what will democracy look like to you in the next government? And for this question, I will begin from where we finished. So starting with Jane Hutt this time.
Thank you very much, Patience. Well, you know, it was one of the first things that we did over a year ago in the pandemic, was clearly disproportionately impacting and affecting Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people. We were already geared up to deliver a race equality action plan, but we set up an advisory group to help us develop a workforce assessment tool for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people. But throughout the year, we have now developed this race equality action plan. It's out for consultation, so hopefully everyone here will respond. But it was co-constructed with Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people and community mentors in the Welsh Government, but also vitally important that we deliver our strategy to improve the representation of Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people in all our public appointments and in politics.
Thank you, Jane. Elin? Mute there.
Yes, sorry. Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. Plaid Cymru recognises that racism and ethnic intolerance is systemic and institutional, and that's something we have to combat, of course. And as a Plaid, and of course, personally too, we're committed to combating all sorts of discrimination against all sorts of different groups, and representation at Senedd level, as Jane at public appointments, is key to all this, to ensure that people are properly represented at all levels. But of course, there's also, we need to be tackling racism in education, and we're going to address that as applied, implementing the recommendations of Charlotte Williams' report on Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities in the new curriculum, which of course is an opportunity for all of us. We would like to see Welsh history in all its diversity, the history of all the people that have lived in Wales, set in stone, enshrined in law. And also we want to work with ensuring that there's positive action schemes to prepare people from different communities to help to access jobs. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Mia?
Again, the inequalities that have been highlighted in the COVID pandemic with people of colour are just exacerbating and highlighting existing inequalities. We can't pretend that they didn't exist before. That would be naive and foolish of us. Democracy to me looks like the community that it serves, the society that it serves, and I think in Wales we've still got a lot to do on that, and I think that falls on all parties, including my own. As Welsh Conservatives, we have a fund that promotes diverse candidates, but we definitely need to do more. It's definitely an area that we will continue to work in. We would introduce a race equality plan, which we would put together in collaboration with stakeholders. It would have clear targets which a Welsh Conservative government would be held fully accountable to, as would the public sector around it, with measurable outcomes. And it would focus on 4 key themes, which would be racism, education, health, and employment. And all of those would have measurable targets and outcomes which the government could be held to account to if it failed to deliver on those. And I think that's what's really important, is that we're accountable to the communities that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver?
Thanks. Yeah, I think the first thing we have to do is name it for what it is. We live in a racist system that's been built on the backs of people of colour and their sacrifices over generations. And what we can't be doing is offering simple kind of platitude words. We have to commit to real action. Part of that for me, I agree with a lot of what the other candidates have said around education, and likewise the Welsh Lib Dems are committed to the Charlotte Williams recommendations. For me, a lot of it comes down to the criminal justice system, and that's why the Welsh Liberal Democrats are incredibly passionate about seeking devolution of criminal justice to Wales. There are so many injustices within the Welsh criminal justice system that are just copied over from England. And actually, we know in Wales we've got the power and the ability to do something about it. We've done amazing things around women's diversion from criminal justice, and I would want to do the same for people of colour as well, and that's just one example.
Thank you. And Helen?
Yeah, I've been working on inclusion in a professional setting for a long time, but I'm relatively new to politics, and I can't believe we're in a day and age where we need to point out as a political party that we stand in solidarity with grassroots organisations like Black Lives Matter. But unfortunately, we still need to state that, and it should be a given. So a few things that we're going to push for is taking an international stand on justice in light of Wales's colonial history, and ensure that our education is decolonialised. We want to see Wales in charge of policing, and see more justice in the systematic failures that we've seen in policing measures. We also want to see greater diversity in terms of political representation. And we have a challenge fund, and we're challenging ourselves as an organisation to do that. Clearly, I'm speaking of as a privileged white person, recognise that, and we need to do something to change that.
Thank you very much to all the candidates once again. And very quickly, I'm going to go into the next question, which is coming from our other partner organisation, the Electoral Reform Society of Wales. And the question is, successive elections have shown that equality in political institutions cannot be achieved by leaving it to parties. For example, the number of women is likely to reduce following the next election, and we have not yet had a woman of colour elected to Senedd. What will your party do to introduce statutory measures to ensure greater diversity as recommended by the expert panel on Assembly electoral reform? I will start with you again, Helen.
Yeah, this is difficult for us as Wales Green Party. We've taken measures to broaden the candidate standing. So if 50% of our candidates aren't anything other than white male, then we reopen elections. So we've achieved that this year in terms of gender diversity, but we haven't achieved it yet in terms of racial representation. Our Scottish Greens colleagues are further ahead because they're a lot larger in terms of a party. So we're learning from them in how we increase our member representation and how we work with members, form alliances, learn from other organisations to help potential candidates overcome the barriers to standing. And that includes, as I said, our challenge fund to get greater diversity. We also want to involve more people in decision making in the way that we apply our policies as well. And elected to the Senedd, we would do that and bring decision making to the people to which it affects most.
Thank you, Helen. Jane?
Thank you very much. Well, one of the important things that we have done is certainly establish the Access to Elected Office Fund. I think that was one of the first things that Rhiannon from Disability Wales said to me when I became Equalities Minister, to support and encourage disabled people to run for elected office in the Senedd and local government. But also that I've referred to the report that we did last year, the strategy reflecting Wales in running Wales, which refers particularly to our public appointments. I was very proud of Dawn Barden's role as Labour Chair of the committee that was looking at the issues and recommendations from the Laura McAllister report and published those recommendations forced to stop by the pandemic. But we have committed our manifesto that we will look to take those recommendations forwards and consider them in the next Senedd. It is vital that we get more diversity. I also say that I actually only am here probably because 22 years ago I got in on a twinning system, which was a Labour Party positive action to ensure we had fair representation for women in the Senedd.
Thank you. Oliver?
Thank you. There's two parts to this, and the main one for me is that we need to address the elephant in the room. When you have a first past the post system, it makes it almost impossible for parties that are smaller than, say, the two main ones to get anywhere without constant campaigning. And what that means is it privileges people from wealth people who are cis, able-bodied, white, male, and that's wrong. So one of the things I would really like the candidates and parties to commit to is to transform the Welsh Senedd elections into a proportional voting system. Because what that allows you to do is it allows people who don't have the resources, you know, who are disabled, who are people of colour, they have all got more battles to fight than white, male, middle class men. And they don't have the time or the resources or the support to fight first past the post elections. So that's the elephant in the room. In terms of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, we've got so much work to do. I freely admit that. We are, however, the only party in the Senedd that have a female leader, and I would just like to apologise about able-bodied. It's something that I grew up hearing, and it's something that always comes out, but I do mean non-disabled. But yeah, that would be our approach. I think we need to really commit to a proportional system across Wales and make sure that we do that.
Thank you. Elin?
Thank you. Yes, we are committed to proportional representation as well. We're going to implement the recommendations of the expert panel on Assembly electoral reform, in particular on single transferable voting and gender quotas, and expanding the Senedd, because of course it's ridiculous that people are not properly represented in the Senedd. I mentioned, I think, that we'll create a cabinet level post of Minister for Equalities and Women's Empowerment. We would like to see 50-50 representation of men and women at in the Senedd level. We're also committed to the idea of citizens' assemblies. We've talked about creating, well, it's a policy actually, to create a rural assembly to empower rural communities. There's the poverty issue, as I'm a firm believer, and Plaid are also supportive of this, of UBI, of course, because people who live in poverty are unable to participate fully in democracy. So we need to empower them to do that.
Thank you very much, Elin. And finally, for this question, Mia.
Thank you, Patience. I think that Isabel Hardman's book, Why We Get the Wrong Politicians, should be compulsory reading for everyone senior in any political party. I think it highlights a lot of the structural issues that mean that there is a dominance of a certain type of person in politics, and I think that that's something that we need to move away from. And I think sometimes bold and difficult and unpopular decisions need to be made, both internally in parties, but also by governments who have the power to implement changes. I'm really hopeful that the Welsh Conservatives will see the first woman of colour elected in Natasha Asghar in Newport, for a girl from Newport, she's in South Wales East. She's a personal friend of mine. She'd be absolutely fantastic if she was elected. So I've got my fingers crossed for her. But that is just one person, and that is not enough. And there should be many, many more people of colour, and particularly women of colour, standing for all political parties. The Welsh Conservative Party have a programme called Ask Her to Stand, which is focused on women. And sorry, is that the timer, Meg? Yes, it is. And we're looking to build on that with the Conservative Diversity Project to roll that out to people of colour who are conservative leaning and encourage more people to stand. But I fully accept that we have more to do in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have around 4 more questions left from our partner organizations, and then we will pick from other questions in the chat box. So from the Ethnic Youth Support Team, EYST, we have a question which says, the harsh realities of racism are finally being openly discussed, but there is still so much work to do. The past year has particularly highlighted anti-Blackness and racism against East and Southeast Asian people and anti-Semitism. What will you do to tackle each of these similar but unique forms of racism? And I will start with Jane.
Thank you very much, Patience. Well, this is such a key question, and I spent all the past year focusing on how we can develop an anti-racist Wales. And our plan, Race Equality Action Plan, is a plan for an anti-racist Wales. It's very much in contrast to the report produced by the UK government, the Sewell report, which I think it sets things back, as has been said by Doreen Lawrence and many others. So our Race Equality Action Plan has to be about how we develop an anti-racist plan. So we actually, as a Welsh Labour government, we commissioned the Gaynor Legal to do the audit of monuments and street names related to slavery, and also with Kirsty Williams, our colleague in Welsh government, the Lib Dem minister, the First Minister as well, supporting Professor Charlotte Williams to do that key work on our curriculum. But also we have 50 grants going to community organisations. EYST played a really important role in visioning the Race Equality Action Plan. The test will be the delivery of that plan as we come out of the consultation. It is critical that we will move forward for an anti-racist Wales at every level of life, and it does include crime and justice, even though we're not responsible. It does include jobs, it includes education, culture, sport. Every aspect of life is in our plan, so please respond to it.
Thank you. Ellen?
Thank you. Yes, as I said, Plaid Cymru recognised that racial and ethnic intolerance it's systemic and institutional, and this is so unacceptable in the 21st century. I can't believe that we can travel to the moon and we can talk to people in Australia, but we can't be respectful to go towards people who are not the same as us. So we have to start with all these wonderful plans at government level and have a race equality action plan for Wales, tackle racism in education, tackle racism at work, but we also have to work hard ourselves. And one of the things I'd like to see is unconscious bias training across the board for everybody in all levels of society, whoever they are and wherever they work and or go to school, in order to really tackle the individual stuff as well, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. I could go on, but we've talked about the Cabinet Minister. Yeah, we're committed to creating a nation of equals and an equal nation. Thank you, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mia?
Thank you very much, EYST, for the question and for the excellent work that you do, particularly the mentoring project that you've run that I've had the privilege of seeing in action. It's really excellent work. The really key point about our race equality plan is that it has measurable outcomes and targets that we can be held accountable to. And I think that that's really important. Ollie earlier mentioned platitudes and nice words, and I think that we need to move away from that now. We should absolutely be past that, and we should be taking meaningful action. I would also like to say the Welsh Conservatives are committed to working with religious communities to address religious hate crime, particularly focusing on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in our communities, how we can tackle those within our communities, and how we can move forward to be a tolerant nation. Thank you very much, Patience.
Thank you. Oliver?
Thanks. Yeah, so we need to stop talking about it, and we have 4 things that we need to do. We need to admit it. We need to admit that we are a racist society. We need to count it. We need to have up-to-date hate crime reporting figures, and we need to understand absolutely and in detail where these barriers are. We need to challenge it. So at all stages within our own parties and others within society, we need to speak up with courage against racism, and then we need to repair it. So that means a root and branch review of all of our society systems. So one of the things we would like to do with the Welsh Liberal Democrats, particularly around criminal justice, but it could apply to other areas, is the explain or reform principle. So if there is a policy that is racist, we would ask people to explain that policy. And if they can't explain why it results in worse outcomes for people of colour, it would be reformed. And that needs to happen from day one of the new Senedd.
Thank you, Oliver. Helen?
Thank you. So we're hearing a lot of plans and great ambitions from parties that are already in government. The Greens don't yet have a seat in the Senedd. We confront racism, anti-Semitism and prejudice. Actually, the heart of our ethos is climate justice and social justice. So what Greens do in government, and we're doing this in every other part of the UK except Wales, is we ask the right questions, we challenge thinking, and we hold government to account on these plans that have been discussed and created, but actually hold government to account for delivery by having that green in the room for challenge.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go straight into the next question now, which is from the Women's Equality Network of Wales. In light of several all-male debates and hustings that have taken place so far, for example, the ITV Leaders Debate and the Wales Online Hustings, as well as the fact that we're having an Equalities Hustings today in which no party has put forward a racialized candidate as a representative. What do your parties plan to do in order to improve diversity at all levels of our political institutions, including in leadership positions? And I will start with you again, Helen.
Yeah, that's a fantastic observation. I've been in numerous hustings this week where I've been the only female in the room. And I'm actually used to it because I champion women in engineering, and I'm normally the only environmentalist and female in the room. But it's not an acceptable situation in terms of politics. And our stance is that Green Party won't actually attend a hustings where it's an all-male panel. So if we pick up that there is an all-male panel, we will send a woman. And that's actually going to happen next week on the BBC Leaders Debate that we've now been invited to, where we're going to send Amelia Womack, who's not the leader of Wales Green Party, but she's a fantastic candidate and will represent greater diversity. I can't remember the second bit of the question, sorry. So I'll leave it there.
That's all right, I think that has covered it pretty much. Oliver?
Yeah, I think every party has a lot of work to do. I think Helen made it really clear at the beginning, and we're in a very similar boat as the Welsh Liberal Democrats, as a smaller party. The challenges of doing community engagement and campaigning make it very hard. That's not an excuse, that's just an explanation. We need to do more. I also think there is something quite alarming for me about the sort of gatekeepers of democracy. So it was an all-male debate for the Welsh Senedd leaders, but it didn't need to be. There was a Welsh woman who leads a political party that's been in government for the last 5 years. So I think that's really important, that if parties are putting women forward, people of colour, people need to be represented by our institutions as a matter of course. I would like to say I'm standing in for a person of colour, a female candidate who wasn't able to make it today. So that's the only reason I'm here. But I'm also hoping I can speak as a gay and disabled candidate as well.
Thank you very much. Mia?
The absolutely key thing is getting women to move from being grassroots activists and campaigners, of which there are many excellent ones in all huge range of topics and issues, taking that step from being a campaigner to standing and putting yourself forward. And quite frankly, I understand why a lot of women don't want to do that. The amount of abuse that you get targeted at yourself, your family, and even my pets, I've realised in this election, is absolutely horrendous. And I have not enjoyed it at all. It's been absolutely awful. So I can completely understand why women don't put themselves forward. So there needs to be much better support for women who are going to stand, all people who, to be honest, who are going to stand and put their head above the parapet to stand for election. And then there also needs to be real encouragement of women and championing of women, and again, all people, into leadership roles within those parties and to take those steps forward. But at a time when people are regularly sworn at, shouted down, and told that their dog needs to die and they would personally kill it, it doesn't surprise me at all that we don't have enough women or people from minorities. Thank you.
Ellen?
Thank you. Yeah, this is an issue. This is one of the reasons why I keep standing. This is one of the reasons why I am standing for election this time, is because there needs to be more women in politics. There needs to be more diversity. There needs to be representation of more diverse groups. And I'm also a county councillor in Gwynedd, and it's the same issue. We have such poor representation as females, as women in the council, and it's something we're trying to work on for the next council election. How do we get more women standing? Like you said, grassroots activists, yes, but women seem to be quite reluctant to put themselves forward, and you have to ask them. So one of the things we're doing is we're targeting, mentoring and supporting more women and more people from other diverse groups to put themselves forward, to support them, to get their voices heard. How on earth are we going to have a proper democratic society unless we're inclusive? And we're not inclusive. All our fine words, but actually at the grassroots level, we need to have more representation, diverse representation. Thank you, sorry.
Thank you, Ellen. Jane?
Thank you. Well, I think probably we agree with quite a few of the points together today, because it's great to see such a diverse hustings as well. I'm taking up my time, but I do think we have to recognise that there are huge barriers to going into politics, and those have been mentioned already. Mentoring is vitally important. There are people who want to engage, and we've all, I think many of us have been mentors and also learnt from mentoring as well. We need to remove barriers, which of course have impact on, particularly on women, on people's lives and women's lives in terms of caring responsibilities. We have obviously introduced now our access to elected office fund to encourage disabled people to stand for elected office. And I still say, I've said it more than once, we've got to make sure we get more women into public appointments, because that is a way into politics. I started off as a councillor, and I think we need to look at community councillors as a route in, and then into county councillors. They have huge power, councils, as we know, before we get to, as we get to Senedd and Westminster. But also finally wanted to say 16 and 17-year-olds, a real opportunity. And a young woman who joined Welsh Labour said she'd looked at all of the LGBT plus policies of all the parties and decided to join Welsh Labour. Young people are choosing to get involved, and I think they are our future, where we will have diversity in our Senedd.
Thank you very much. And straight away again, I will go into the next partner question, which is coming from Stonewall Cymru. Some teachers continue to feel unable to discuss LGBT identities in their schools due to lack of knowledge, support, or even due to the long-standing shadows of Section 28. Now, the question is, with LGBT plus inclusive relationships and sexuality education now a mandatory part of the new curriculum for Wales, how will your party ensure that all teachers are equipped and supported in its delivery? I will start with you again, Jane.
Thank you very much, Patience. Well, as you say, we now have a brand new curriculum in the Curriculum and Assessment Bill with LGBTQ plus education at its core, relationships and sexuality education. I'm very proud that the Senedd backed that. Not all people and not all members and not all parties backed it. But also that we actually now have to implement that in terms of the curriculum, and that means training teachers, supporting teachers, and indeed parents. I spent a lot of time discussing these issues as the bill was going through scrutiny in the Senedd with the Faith Communities Forum, for example, as well. There were issues and lack of understanding, and this has to be about public education. But I think there's real opportunities, and I just said that's why the young person who just recently joined Welsh Labour felt so empowered by our new curriculum and the opportunities it will provide.
Thank you, Jane. Ellen?
Thank you. Well, it's funny, isn't it? As a psychologist, I've always felt that the personal and social education, subject or lessons have been ignored and almost invisible, in compared to the poor relation in compared to academic subjects. And I'm delighted that the new curriculum is highlighting personal and social education as a core subject, and offering teachers the chance to train properly, to be supported properly, to deliver this. Because this well-being is, if you don't have good mental health, if you don't have well-being, good well-being, you know, nothing else matters really at the end of the day. But of course I would say that. And in terms of Plaid, we are also committed to making sure that this type of education, a statutory element of relationships and sex education aspect of the new curriculum, will include, you know, the experiences and discussion about the LGBTQ+ community as a core element, of course, and that teacher training and support is available.
Thank you very much. Mia?
I'm going to be completely honest with this panel and those here today, because I think that's the best way to be. Section 28 has cast a long dark shadow over the history of my party, and therefore I personally feel that it's our responsibility to undo the damage that it did, and to go above and beyond in order to make sure that our schools are fully inclusive and welcoming environments for all pupils. Certainly and I was growing up and questioning my own sexuality, it was something that really frightened me, and I didn't have those structures in the school where I was at to support me at the time. It's really important that we equip teachers and in our manifesto, we talk about equipping teachers to support them in managing, dealing with challenging homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying, but also that teachers are equipped to teach a fully inclusive relationships and sexuality education. We've also committed to mental health support for LGBT+ young people in schools, but all young people. And I think that's a really critical part of the pillars of providing a truly inclusive and supportive education. Thank you.
And Oliver?
Thanks. Yeah. Apologies in advance if this becomes emotional, because this is something that I've lived through. While I was at school, still under the shadow, very near shadow of Section 28, I was sexually and physically assaulted in the class in front of teachers. People would wipe various horrible things on my face and in my hair, and the teacher stood by and watched that happen. So this is something that isn't just a political thing for me. This is something that causes a lot of difficulty for me even now, even talking about it. So the main thing, I think, is yes, absolutely support for teachers in engaging with young people, but also making our schools safe spaces. And that's something that the Welsh Liberal Democrats are really committed to, is making and rolling out and extending schools as a trauma-informed space, one where people are open to talk about their experiences, where they have therapeutic support, and that, more than anything, will protect young people from becoming victimised by bullies and homophobic people.
Helen?
I've almost forgotten everything I'm going to say, because that's just devastating, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Oliver. LGBT+ IQA Young Green community has been working with our Young Greens on our Young People's Manifesto that's just been published. So we're practicing what we preach in terms of bringing and shaping policy down to the people that it affects most. They are at pains to recognise that trans young people are having a really difficult time at the moment, and this is something within our party, within the Green Party, that we are really strong on. That trans men are men, trans women are women, and non-binary identities exist and are valid.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very conscious of the time that we have left. We have one more question from a partner organization. I'm going to read it out, but if I can please ask the candidates to respond to that question via email to the partner organization, so that we're able to take as many questions as we can from the chat group and other people who've sent in questions. So the question from Race Alliance Wales, which we're asking the candidates candidates to respond to via email to Race Alliance Wales is, how do you plan to lead the tangible implementation of the Race Equality Action Plan? And how do you plan to ensure that disabled people of colour, queer people of colour, and women of colour are included in its implementation? The reason why we're now asking you to respond via email is because we're conscious of the fact that we've taken quite a number of questions on the Race Equality Action Plan. So straight away, I'm going to go into some of the questions that I've picked up from the chat box. And again, there's so many valid questions, and we're not going to be able to cover all of them, even if we stayed online for the next 3 hours. So we're going to collate all the questions, and we will send them again to all the candidates. And I think there's been requests as well for the candidates to put in their email addresses in the chat box so that they will be able to respond to the questions. Sorry, Ellen is asking me to repeat the question from Race Alliance Wales. I will do that very quickly for you. It is, how do you plan to lead the tangible implementation of the Race Equality Action Plan? And how do you plan to ensure that disabled people of colour, queer people of colour, and women of colour are included in its implementation? That's the question. So I've got one question here from the chat box, and it says, will you tackle the alarming levels of misogyny and sexism in schools and the rising numbers of sexual assaults on female pupils? And for this question, I'm going to ask just any one of the candidates to go for it. Will you tackle the alarming levels of misogyny and sexism in schools and the rising numbers of sexual assaults on female pupils, and how? Any one of the candidates.
I can take that.
Sorry.
If you ask anyone, we all want to say something.
I know you all, but going around all the candidates again is just going to take up all the time that we've got. So if we can get, some sort of response to each question, as many questions as possible, I think will be better than nothing for us.
Can I just say one quick thing, that our curriculum assessment bill will exactly do that. It is the relations of sexuality education will help to address this. And this is something where it's not just teachers, it's governors as well. And obviously it's the government making sure that we implement the Curriculum and Assessment Act as it will be. So it is through legislation, training and public education.
Thank you very much, Jane. The next question I'm picking up is the See Around Britain app, that's the SAB app, See Around Britain, and Disabled Run charity provides vital information during COVID, enabling citizens and venue owners, both big and small, to upload photos and videos of venues to add to the 23,000 already on the app. To show their COVID safety measures to assist the economy and social life of Wales. So the question is, what practical commitments will parties make, if elected, to proactively promote and support the vital app and to supporting disabled people's organizations during COVID?
Coming in really quickly here.
Yes, Oliver, go for it.
As a disabled person, trying to work out where you can go to visit without knowing whether it's accessible is one of the things that takes up so much brain power that it's exhausting. One of the things the Welsh Liberal Democrats want to do, and I won't comment specifically on the app because obviously that's a specific app which is brilliant, but we can't make commitments on an app in a hustings. One of the things we do want to see is the use of the £500 million Towns Fund, which would be open for bids to make things and shops and spaces much more accessible for people as well.
Thank you very much. And I'll go straight into the next question I've picked up on, which is, will your party provide child care support for all children from the age of 6 months? This is the crucial period when parents, mainly mothers, are forced to leave their jobs because their childcare bill is more than they are able to earn. And to add to that question, this person is asking, will your childcare offer including parents who are training or in education too? So will they extend that offer to those parents?
Can I come in on that? We have committed to expand our free childcare offer down to 2-year-olds, but I think that there needs to be further look at this, and I think that actually there needs to be a real assessment as to women who are in training, education, and also women who are on the job hunt, who are applying for jobs, to be able to access this support, because I believe it's a real, for me, I view it as a social mobility issue, and it's preventing women from accessing the workplace, and therefore it definitely needs to be reviewed.
Can I come in on that one?
Yes.
From our perspective, it's not just a childcare issue, it's structural inequality. So we're talking about sort of women's childcare, but why not men's childcare? You know, this is everybody's role. So a universal basic income would give basic financial security to allow that greater flexibility, and for couples and families to design their lives around what meets the needs of their families.
Thank you, Helen. I think Ellen had her hand up, and then Jane on that same question.
I just wanted to endorse exactly what Helen said about UBI, about how we need to have radical change in our society and implement a pilot scheme for UBI, because that's the root cause of all this. It's poverty. And if Scotland can have a feasibility study, then why not Wales? Thanks.
Thanks, Ellen. Jane?
Yes, just childcare is so important to not just women, parents, women's rights, crucially, because women are so often the main carers, but we're going to fund childcare for more families where parents are in education and training. But I think crucially important in terms of tackling inequalities is that Welsh Labour government has kept our Flying Start programmes going for children in some of our most deprived communities, and many of you will be aware of how important those Flying Start centres are. And it's not just the childcare, it's support for parenting, extra support for parenting, which is crucial to enable parental confidence and access to not only training, education, but jobs.
Thank you very much for all those responses. I go straight to the next question I picked up, and just trying to get that one now. With the Senedd elections fast approaching, we at Leonard's Cheshire have heard from many disabled people that they have not, or that they have been asked to call up their local polling station to check if it is accessible. This is not acceptable and just serves to show the lack of equality in politics and political representation. What will each party do to ensure that disabled people are actively involved in politics and can access their polling stations to have their voices heard? Does anybody want to go for that? Yes, Mia.
All polling stations should be accessible. That is absolutely appalling that people have needed to call and ask. I'm personally not a fan of the oh gosh, what they're called, box polling stations that they put down that don't have step-free access. They often have a step, and they don't have a ramp of any kind, or if they do, it's a piece of chipboard, which is just frankly ridiculous. And I think in the 21st century we should be doing a lot better. And I think it goes back to there needing to be more representations of disabled people, but also people in local government. And this is echoing a point that Erin mentioned earlier. Only 29% of women are represented in local government, and the figure is not good for those with disabilities, and it's actually for people working in local government and also those representing, which can see those changes come about. But yeah, that's absolutely appalling and should not be the case at all.
Yes, could I just say also, we need to know now if disabled people have had those calls. This is totally unacceptable. I certainly would want to hear about them in my constituency in the Vale of Glamorgan. I mean, we've run a strong committee, and it's been cross-party in terms of these very difficult elections anyway with coronavirus. And we need to know the the electoral registration officers are responsible. It's local government who are delivering those polling stations. But please let us know. I'm sure we all want to know, but I certainly want to know, as the Minister for Equalities, if there are issues of this kind.
Thank you very much, Jane. I will try to squeeze in the very last question in the few minutes before we round up. And it says, can you provide specific examples of how you as a candidate and how your political party challenges myths around people who seek asylum or sanctuary in the UK? There is a lot of false information, and some of the party's election materials only adds to the hostile environment. Does anybody want to respond to this?
Really like to comment here, but I'm aware I'm sure a lot of other people would. Yeah, it's wrong and disgusting, and I think it needs to be absolutely robustly challenged. And anyone who doesn't is part of the problem. I've seen some of those leaflets and they are appalling. I would just also like to say that one of the policies the Welsh Liberal Democrats are proposing is legislating to make sure that our access to health services are not in any way going to be compromised by services reporting people to the Home Office. It might be tricky, it might need a bit of a firm argument for the devolution settlement, but we're committed to find a way, because that's also linked to asylum seekers and people who have come into the country, and people should be able to access health services in society without fear of deportation.
Can I make it clear that that has been the case in Wales? We did not go down that route. GPs, NHS, open, available, and we abhor the hostile environment. And in terms of refugees and asylum seekers, Wales is actually a nation of sanctuary. And that's where all our public services have got a commitment to making that the case.
Thank you very much, Jane. And on that note, can I once more say a very big thank you to all the candidates for all their responses and for taking out time to attend this event on behalf of the organisers of the Equalities Hustings, and also to say thank you to all who have sent in their questions, and apologise, for our inability to have taken all the questions, but definitely have collated all the questions, and these will be forwarded to the candidates, and hopefully we will, push to get as many responses as possible back to those who have asked those questions. So I will hand you back to Catherine for the last word and the closing.
Thank you, Patience. I've got very little to say except a huge thank you to you, Patience, for your fantastic chairing, for all our partners in this really important Equalities Hustings, because the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected all the people that we all as our organisations work with, and I don't need to remind you all of that. Please do join When Wales, and of course engage with all the other organisations that are on the call. We've just put our link to how you join When Wales and to our manifesto in the chat, and I really appreciate the time of the candidates. I know, having been a candidate myself, it's pretty relentless and it's pretty hard work. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for the people in the audience who posted such great questions, and really appreciate your time. So thank you all. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Have a great day, and thank you.